we'll call this meeting of Special General Committee meeting to order. So thank you everybody for coming today. The first item we have is the land acknowledgement.
We acknowledge that we gather on the traditional and treaty territories of the Williams Trees First Nation, including Nishnawbe peoples of Hiawatha, Curve Lake, Alderville, Coastal Lake, Jordina Island, Rama, and the Mississaugas of Skugog Island. For generations, the Michi-Sagi Nishnawbe have cared for these lands and waters, guided by knowledge, ceremony, and responsibility. We recognize the ongoing impacts of these treaties, the injustices that occurred, and the enduring strength and resurgence of Indigenous communities. As we live and work here, we commit to reflection, respect, and meaningful action in the spirit of reconciliation.
The Council for the City of Peterborough recognizes the principles contained in our Constitution and in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We will now have 30 seconds of silent reflection. All right, please stand for the national anthem.
Strong and free from we stand on Lord holy, on and
All right, the next item on our list is disclosure of pecuniary interest. Does anyone have any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Mr. Clerk? Don't.
Mr. Chair, I see none at this time.
All right, so thank you very much. And we are going to turn it over to Councillor Parnell for the infrastructure planning and growth management portion of the meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just make some opening remarks. This is a meeting is just a little bit different. It's an additional meeting to our consideration of the new community planning permit bylaw. We have had extensive consultation up to this point. I have a whole page listing all of it. And this is an additional one. And this meeting is considered as an education input meeting. We won't be having any amendments on the floor today. If anybody wants to suggest anything, we are encouraged to send it to our planning staff for their consideration for the final draft. Also, I would like to thank all councillors who did send in their questions to planning staff. We all are in receipt of a 27-page memo based on those questions so that we could get our answers ahead of the meeting to better understand different aspects of this bylaw. I also like to thank staff for their considerable work to this point to get us here, all the public engagement that you've done with all of our stakeholders, and all of the work, extra work that you have done with us as councillors. Your efforts are indeed appreciated. We will be suspending only one thing in the procedural bylaw today because councillors had indicated that they would like to ask more than maybe 2 questions. So that is the only part of the procedural bylaw that we are waiving today. I will recognize anybody who wants to speak. You can ask up to 4 questions succinctly, and then I'll move on to the next speaker, and he can go back on the list if you have more than 4. Councillor Burke?
Chair Parnell, thank you. I'm just confused where the idea came that we couldn't make amendments. I made the motion to call this meeting, and the idea was that by the time it comes to us in June, it would be too late to tweak the final bylaw. And therefore, this is the time, much like at budget time, where we could put forward amendments, motions, and sort of push it forward to that end goal instead of having it all be done at the end. So I don't know where that idea is coming from, where we can't make any amendments. This is a council meeting.
Well, we have had discussions about this. This is an education and input meeting. Amendments, last minute amendments that have not even been sent to the clerk or the chair. It's not very respectful for one thing, but also there's been so much work that has gone into this bylaw to this point, including public consultation, to make last minute amendments to all of that work and all of those decisions so far. Is disingenuous. So
my point is that I made the motion for the meeting and that there was nothing in the wording of the motion that talked about an education session. There was nothing in the wording of the motion that talked about not being able to move things forward. In fact, the opposite, it was that the way the bylaw, the CPP bylaw was going to be coming to us at the end of this, right before our summer break, the staff's fear was that at that point, it would be too late to make any changes potentially. And
Councillor Burke, you don't have the floor, okay? We are not accepting amendments today to vote on. If you have an amendment, it is to be shared with staff and to be considered with all of the other input that we are still receiving on the bylaw. That's
point of order.
No, you don't interrupt with point of order. Sorry.
No, it's permitted. A
No,
point of order is permitted.
No, you may not interrupt with point of order. You can raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you, but you may not interrupt.
There was no
Now,
one speaking. I wasn't interrupting, Chair.
Excuse me, you're interrupting the chair. And I've stated we are not voting on any amendments today. If none have been shared, well, one was shared and withdrawn with the clerk. So we will be proceeding. We are going to the format of the meeting. We're proceeding with the meeting, people. So I know I'm finishing my opening remarks. I can see you, and I can see you, but we are proceeding with the meeting and how we are going to work through this. We've got 3 hours total. We are going to go section by section. Mrs. Kimball is going to introduce the whole procedure, and then section by section, she will introduce that, and we will have questions for each section as we work through the bylaw. Okay, Councillor Lucica.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, you had mentioned we had discussed this being an education session. My question is, who is we? Because we as a council didn't discuss it being an education session, and the title of the agenda is General Committee Meeting, which is governed by our procedure bylaw, and we're not suspending any procedure bylaw that has to do with moving motions. So we should be able to proceed based on our procedure bylaw for a general committee meeting. So that is my point of order, and we did not as a council decide that there would be no amendments or recommendations via motion to this particular draft bylaw. So my question is, who is the we that decided it was an education session? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Through the chair, I need some clarification here because I was coming here, this isn't just an educational. I've been to every meeting of the CPPS, are still confused, and I'm here to ask questions, but also make an amendment to the CPPS. You're telling me that we're not allowed to do that, not till the final, when it goes to the 26th of June or whenever that is, and then it's too late because there is too many questions in this here for me. And you're saying, well, you can ask 4 questions, but you can't make any amendments. That's what this whole meeting is about, of changing or listening to staff and then making changes to the CPPS that helps everybody, not only council, but the residents that live out here in the community.
Councillor Rial, you can make suggestions, but we won't be voting on amendments. And did you send any amendments to the clerk and the chair before this meeting, as is required?
No, I ask questions.
Well, there's no amendments, and that's the end
It's
of
going to
that.
be a whole bunch after this meeting.
That's fine. We are proceeding with the meeting, and I'm going to, you've already had your time to speak. Thank you. Go ahead.
Chair Parnell, respectfully, you weren't at the meeting, the general committee meeting where this motion was passed for the first time. And the discussion at that point was a broad discussion with input from all of council. The CAO Reina intervened, and the idea where that we had unity around was that this meeting was going to be handled like a budget meeting, and that we were going to go through page by page and have the opportunity at that point, just like at budget time, before the final budget is prepared, to maybe potentially make a motion. I'm not saying I have one prepared, but if I ask a question and there's something that comes up that's a red flag, I actually disagree with you. I think it's more respectful to the work that staff have put in for us to do our workshopping today. The whole point of this meeting was for us to do our workshopping today and not have that workshopping or those changes come at the final hour. The CPP has to be submitted the day after it's coming to council in June. And so the whole reason of this meeting was for us to be able to do our workshopping on behalf of our constituents,
Thank you.
on behalf of the answers that we may or may not receive, and be able to move this ahead and move it forward in a smooth fashion. And
Thank
that,
you, Councillor.
so I don't know how you're inventing the fact, because it's a pure invention, that we can't make a motion. I don't know where it's coming from. And I'll follow through with this meeting today, but I will follow up and I'll look at the minutes and I'll look at the motion and I will follow up on this because I believe you're inventing this entirely. And I don't believe
Actually,
you have the
thank
floor
you.
as the chair to do
Kate.
this.
Actually, I do. Thank you. We're going to our interim, or I guess acting CAO.
Through you, Madam Chair, and I just wanted to share, and I'm really just coming in cold. That had a conversation with the commissioner just before the meeting, and hearing the concerns and the importance of these changes that may be coming out of this meeting. What the commissioner is committing to is that any suggestions that are made and the wording can be brought forward in the form of a motion of specific wording, that prior to the final bylaw coming at the end of June, that everything that's submitted as, let's call it a draft motion, will be reviewed. And the intention of that opportunity for staff is to avoid any unintended consequences of a change in one section that may trickle into another section and then create other chaos. And that's the ask of staff, recognizing council has their prerogative, but if the process could allow for a submission of a motion that can be submitted to staff, that they can verify that that change will not impact. And I'm hoping, and maybe the commissioner can comment, that if there's a concern of an unintended consequence, that he has time or they have time to reach out to that councillor and verify what the appropriate change could be. And if all that can be done before the final draft, if that would be appropriate.
Thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Nelson, did you want to add something, sir?
So no, I think Commissioner Simonovsky's basically covered fairly clearly. Again, just reiterating, by all means, this was the venue to get out any questions or concerns that council still has, because again, the opportunity to vet out those questions, to understand what the concerns are, what the issues are, so that staff have an opportunity. What our preference to try to avoid would be a motion that council adopts that staff really haven't had an opportunity to vet through and be then painted into a corner that we would we would have to implement that because it's council's direction. We're asking for the possibility and the ability to work through those questions and those concerns with council such that we have an ability to work it into and try to vet it out prior to us coming back with the final version. So ultimately, we're just trying to avoid a motion that council would adopt, and therefore it seals sort of the direction that staff have to take, as opposed to asking the question and giving staff an opportunity to review it through the bylaw and what the overarching implications are, and getting back to council on that prior to us coming back with the final version. I will possibly defer to Director Appleby if he has anything further to add, but.
Did you have something you wanted to add, Director?
Madam Chair, not too much other than to say, I think it was well covered. I think, our hope as staff is to be able to receive the chance, if there are any proposed edits to be made to the bylaw, that we have an opportunity to review them, make sure that they're not going to create a conflict either within the bylaw or a conflict with official plan policy or some other applicable policy, perhaps provincial policies. And so, our hope is to be able to take, that type of direction and feedback away from today, work on that over the next few weeks, so that by the time we come back to council, we will be able to give you fuller responses to, specific proposed amendments.
Thank you. I recognize Councillor Crowley and then Mayor Leo.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Parnell. I'm just wondering, maybe I know that I was one of the people that one of the councillors that submitted an amendment and pulled it because I do understand what the acting CAO and Commissioner Nelson are talking about. I know there was a few things. I know I had submitted a large number of questions last week to Director Appleby, who, thank you so much for answering all of them. I know that there was a few there, including one regarding adding language for the Climate Change Action Plan. In the answer to that question, you specify that we could change that. Is that something that we need to bring out today and make an amendment on that? Or is that something that you could go back and actually, you'll put that into the CPPS?
Director?
Sorry, through you, Chair.
Through the chair, my suggestion would be that, if for a particular item, if you would like that considered in the final version of the bylaw, we can take that direction today, and look to incorporate that between now and the final version.
Okay, I mean, when we get to it, I would love to make that, if that's appropriate to make, through you. If I may ask another question of Director Appleby?
Yes.
I know that this was more of a general question, and I know that I met with, yourself and Ms. Kimball regarding the potential of changing the language in the CPPS regarding lodging houses. There are, just a little bit of background, I've had a large number of West End users who've reached out to me lately regarding owners from out of the city coming in, purchasing a house, adding multiple bedrooms in it. And I know that we had some discussion surrounding what constitutes a lodging house. And I know that from the conversation we had, it went back with potentially a licensing issue, and we would have to work in tandem with that. I know that I submitted quite a few amendments potentially. Is there a way that I can ask, yourself, Director Appleby, or potentially Commissioner Potts, maybe we can work on something to have some language in there to solidify it? I know that it's a very contentious issue, at least in the West End. I'm not sure if it is in any other area of the town, but I know that there's sort of an intent of usage of a property, and in a residential neighborhood for somebody to come in and purchase multiple properties, turn them into multiple, what I would consider a lodging house, might not be the intended use of a property. I don't know if that's something that we can look on, if it needs to be added to the CPPS. And I know, Chair Parnell, there is no page that references that, which is sort of why I'm asking it now. So I don't know. Is that something that maybe through you, Chair, Director Appleby, we could potentially work on? towards the final?
Madam Chair, I think certainly happy to look into the issue. It's a fairly complex issue.
Mhm.
We certainly need to work with legal services, on that issue. One of the things that I would think about, when thinking about this is sort of the level of additional public consultation might be needed related to that, and whether it can be done as part of the CPP or whether it needs to be done as its own entity is something that we would need to think about, but certainly happy to take the time between now, and June to start to put our minds to the question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is considered the input from today's meeting. Staff are making notes of everything that we're asking about, and they will be, having a good look at it to see what the implications of it are. Mayor Leal, you have the floor.
So, thanks very much, Madam Chair. Just a question to Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson, you provided yesterday a very comprehensive 27-page memo on CPP, which I found extremely helpful and extremely informative. The question I have on the left-hand column called Key Questions and Comments, is it correct that a lot of those questions came from members of council through this whole process, and other broader community comments that on the right-hand column you provided very detailed responses to? Is that essentially how this was put together?
Through the chair, that is correct.
And then for you, Madam Chair, I mean, it's pretty clear on page 26. You've outlined next steps, and I'll just read it for the public record. Staff are committed to reviewing these comments along with other feedback received to date, and will consider proposed edits to the draft CPP bylaw. A revised version of the bylaw will be released for council and public review in early June of 2026. So it's pretty clear to me the path forward that's been laid out in this memo of yesterday. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Burke, we really would like to get to the meeting.
Yeah, we don't have any limits on questions, so I have my right to ask my questions, my hands up through you, Madam Chair, to staff. I'm reading the motion that was the impetus for this meeting, and I'm trying to understand your rationale. So is it correct that you're saying that there's no decisions going to be coming out of this body today? There's just suggestions. There's no decisions coming out of this body. And staff are saying that you would rather prefer any motions that are made on the CPP to happen at the June meeting? Is that what I'm hearing? Instead of happening today and giving you time to be folded into the CPP, you'd rather have, if need be, a motion to change certain aspects of the CPP. You're saying you'd rather have that happen in June? Is that correct? Because I have some that I'll gladly hold off today, and I'll bring them at the last minute at June, if that's what you're telling me.
Commissioner?
Through the chair, no, that is not what, obviously, if council wishes, that's still council's will. If council wants to give staff direction, they have that body. What staff are asking is the ability to take concerns, comments, questions away, as opposed to a hard confirmed motion of council, which basically is giving staff a firm direction before staff have the ability to vet that, as Director Appleby had indicated, to confirm that it's not in contradiction or not in compliance with other laws or other portions of the CPP. It's just basically trying to have that ability to vet it through and confirm what are the implications of that prior to or as opposed to a firm motion of council and direction from council to make that change without staff having the ability to confirm, does it have other larger overlying implications?
And I just thought that the point of this meeting was to do that very thing you just described, so that we could put, much like in the budget, this happens exactly the same way in the budget. We may make a motion, but it comes in the final package. And I thought that staff would rather us make any workshopping changes to the draft copy, because it's just a draft copy at this point, that we would workshop any draft changes. The only way I know that council can make a decision is as a body. So I'm confused as to how these little suggestions are going to be implemented into the plan. I don't understand that from our procedural guidelines. This is a general committee meeting. And my understanding for this meeting is that as a body, we would get to vote and decide on certain tweaks and ideas to change the draft copy, because it's a draft copy at this point, making the process easier in June when the final copy gets presented to us. But what I'm hearing is that we don't have the ability to make any decision. I don't know where it's coming from. Apparently, we don't have an ability to make a decision as a body today. And that decision is going to happen then at our only other opportunity, because we don't make decisions as a body over email. We don't make decisions as a body through suggestions. We make them at general committee and at council. So this is the last chance as a councillor that I see for me to present an option to make a decision as a body before the final decision happens in June. So I'm just really confused as to why we're even here. I can ask questions all day long from my office. I thought we were here to vet out some of the changes that as a councillor we may or may not want to make.
Thank you, Councillor. Your time is concluded. I'm going to ask you a quick question. How many of you have submitted amendments to the clerk in advance of this meeting? You did? Clerk, how many motions did you receive? Please.
Is the clerk addressing myself, Councillor Lucica? Because
I'm asking the clerk a question as chair.
you said you did, and you looked at me. So I'm so respectfully,
Councillor,
Chair.
Councillor.
You looked at me and said you did, and so I'm asking, were you referring to
Councillor?
me,
Councillor,
Chair?
Councillor, I'm talking to the clerk. Mr. Clerk, how many amendments had you received today or prior to this meeting?
Thank you for the question. I believe it's been one member.
So one.
Recollection's correct.
Thank you. And as per our procedural bylaw, if you have an amendment or a motion, it is to be sent to the clerk electronically before the meeting. There was only one and it was withdrawn. And this is an input session. Your suggestions are being taken by staff for the final tweaks. They want to check it against the current bylaw, draft bylaw, to make sure it isn't in contradiction of anything else that's already in there. So we're going to proceed. I've got Councillor Duguay as the next speaker, and then we really need to start this meeting.
Point of order.
Oh,
Point of order.
I see your hand, but I am not recognizing you right now. Councillor Duguay.
Thank you, Chair Parnell. With respect to today's, the intent of today's meeting, I particularly have no issues with council advancing a series of recommendations for staff to consider. We should be very cognizant that while we're meeting Bill 98, which will have potential impact upon our community planning permit system, potentially our official plan and other applicable law, I want to be satisfied that Director Appleby and his staff have had a chance to, any suggestions here, we ensure that it's vetted against, for example, governing and forthcoming legislation. That's very, very important. We've been 30 minutes, folks. We haven't started, so I'm hoping we can start soon. Thank you.
Councillor Lucica, do you have something new to add?
Thank you very much, Chair. I would just like to say, echoing my colleagues' comments, I intend to make motions, as our CAO has said is permissible, with the filter that, of course, staff will look at any potential conflict in terms of provincial, municipal issues that are related to any suggestions we may make. And we can ask those questions during the process of going through these things. As co-liaison of the Infrastructure Planning and Growth Management portfolio, as co-liaison, I think that we all deserve to respectfully just establish the understanding of what this meeting is. I did contribute questions to the planning staff that helped to compose this document. It was 28 pages. We received it yesterday, late day. And there are questions and there are responses, but we have an opportunity today to be able to dialogue and have a conversation about what those responses are. whether they're meaningful, whether they answered our questions, and that is the purpose of this document. It's a living thing, and it's based on the questions we've asked of planning staff, and it's on this basis that we would make recommendations or motions that would go to the next level. That was the purpose of this meeting, and I'm glad we've clarified, and thank you for doing that, Commissioner Simonovskis, that motions can be made at this meeting. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Councillor Riel?
Through the chair, I mean, shame on me for thinking that this meeting here was the meeting that we were going to make motions. I sent questions to staff, which they answered. At this meeting today, I felt that we were going to make motions on the CPPS. So when would we be able to make motions except for the 26th of June? But when I read through this here CPP document, all the way through it, is I, as a city councillor, am supposed to give unbridled delegated authority to staff. And I'm not prepared to do that. And that's what I read all through this document here, is that all through this here, forget about council, forget about the people. You're going to give them unbridled delegated authority to do whatever they want with planning. Well, my example of what they did for planning is a 17-story building on 100th Street East. And that's why I'm here today, for the taxpayers of the city of Peterborough to ask questions and change the CPP that works for everybody. And that's not happening today.
Thank you. You will be able to ask questions and make suggestions. We just will not be voting on amendments, okay? We are going to proceed with the meeting. We've got 2.5 hours left. Ms. Kimball, would you like to start us off, please?
Sure. Thank you. Through you, Chair, to the General Committee. We're happy to be here this afternoon and hopefully engage in a productive working session related to the draft community planning permit bylaw for the city. As you know, the city has adopted a new official plan, which was adopted by council in November of 2021 and approved by the minister in April of 2023. In accordance with legislative requirements, the city is required to implement the official plan with a regulatory bylaw, and council has directed that regulatory bylaw in this case is the community planning permit bylaw. The effect would be that it is going to replace and rescind the city's comprehensive zoning bylaw, which is dated. It will modernize the development standards and introduce a tool to the city that affords the opportunity to introduce the exchange of building height for community benefit. The Planning Act provides that 3 years is required to implement the city's official plan, which would bring us to April of 2026. And the initiatives under the city's housing action plan committed to having this bylaw in place by the end of June 2026. The community planning permit draft bylaw was distributed for public consultation in its current form in January of 2026, and we have held several open houses, a total of 5 open houses, and a statutory public meeting with council on March the 23rd of 2026, at which time council requested this meeting to facilitate a dedicated time and space for council to ask questions and familiarize themselves with the bylaw. In advance of this meeting, as has already been discussed, we did seek some direction from council in terms of what kinds of questions we were to expect, and did our best to provide responses to those questions during the and at the same time preparing revisions to the draft version of the bylaw. It is the intent and the recommendation in the report that council, all councillor comments today be referred back to staff for consideration and review, and that those be documented in a further recommendation report that council will consider by the end of June of this year. The process that has been undertaken to get to this point in the project has been extensive. We have had a very comprehensive engagement program that we worked through. We've been working through with various agencies, departments, council, with our Indigenous partners, First Nations, urban Indigenous groups, and together with the public. There's multiple opportunities for engagement and consultation throughout the past almost 2 years now. And it has culminated in the draft bylaw that is before you, but we do acknowledge that it's not yet sort of in its final form, but it does reflect what has been discussed and considered throughout that consultation process. First and foremost, I guess, wanted to point out that the CPP bylaw ultimately implements the city's official plan. And so insofar as it is a regulatory tool, it will not support development that goes beyond the vision and objectives of the city's official plan. It is a living document, so similar to the official plan, amendments can be made as we advance and working with this tool. It is a new tool, and we recognize that although we're doing our level best to prepare an implementation plan for the tool and the new process, inevitably, there are going to need to be tweaks that will be made within the coming year and into the future beyond that time, to ensure that its implementation is appropriate and that it suits the needs of the municipality. Throughout the consultation process, there are a few key themes that have emerged, and we've summarized some of those in the report that is before you today. And those actually were also reflected at the public meeting in March of this year. We've spoken to issues like land use compatibility. So we have heard some concerns regarding the compatibility of employment uses and major facilities with what we call sensitive land uses. So those residential types of uses which are within our major mixed-use corridors and where they abut our general employment lands. In response to that, for example, planning staff have developed and expanded on some regulations that within the bylaw that you'll see coming back in June that align with provincial land use compatibility guidelines and are designed to mitigate and minimize the impacts that of existing major facilities from sensitive land uses. And that will also provide reciprocal protections for existing sensitive land uses when they're being introduced adjacent to major facilities. Class 3 building heights. So there's been a lot of discussion about maximum building heights. And that was a key theme throughout the consultation process with the public and with all of our working groups. The draft bylaw incorporates a class 1 and a class 2 maximum building height. But the question that we put out in January together with the draft bylaw is, should there be a class 3 council building height limit? And so planning staff incorporated that into survey questions and throughout the consultation process. And we heard from councillors about class 3 building heights. And I would suggest that generally speaking, there is support for the establishment of a defined class 3 building height limit within the CPP bylaw. We have some ideas around that, and those were expressed in the memo that was circulated by Commissioner Nelson yesterday, and we can speak to them further as we get to that section in the bylaw today. Green development standards was another item that was identified by this council at the public meeting. We have received feedback from specific councillors as well, addressing a desire or expressing a desire to incorporate voluntary green development standards into the draft CPP bylaw. And it was specifically introduced as an option for facility service and matter in exchange for additional height in a class 2 or a class 3 permit proposal. So we have taken a look at some options together with our consulting team. We have what we think are some useful approaches with respect to introducing those green development standards as facilities, services, and matters. And we can speak to those a little bit in more depth, if you like, as we get to those sections of the bylaw. But suffice it to say that there is an option to incorporate that potentially as a voluntary measure. I think we probably can have a more wholesome discussion about facility services and matters as we get to that later this afternoon. Incorporating or aligning the bylaw with the objectives of the Climate Action Plan, that also was identified as a key theme throughout the comments that we heard from council at the end of March. And there is commentary about that both in the memo, and we can expand upon that a little later as well. But again, we do also have staff on hand today to provide additional explanation. But generally speaking, the suggestion is that the bylaw itself and the nature of supporting intensification and transit supportive density is essentially in conformity with the Climate Action Plan 2.0, insofar as it is possible, we could further some of the recommendations from the Climate Action Plan 2.0 through the Facility Services and Matters Fund and Reserve Fund that would be set up in response to development applications throughout this tool. Priority setting for facility services and matters, again, that will also be discussed throughout the afternoon, I suspect. But that is another key theme that we heard. And we are actually working with our consultants and our economists who are form part of the consulting team. Parcel Economics is busily doing some work to help to inform where we might land or where we might recommend that council lands with respect to facility services and matters in June. And then environmental protection and EP precinct mapping. Again, we've had some further discussions, and we would be happy to expand upon those as we advance through the sections this afternoon to help explain sort of the limitations on what we can do there in terms of conformity with the official plan and you know while respecting property owners' property rights for development. So I would suggest that probably the most efficient way to handle the review of the bylaw is we're proposing that we would go section by section. The thought is that we would facilitate that discussion. I could introduce each section of the bylaw, give you a general overview of what each section intends to do, and then we can open the floor to questions or comments. Councillor, or sorry, Director Appleby is here, so between the two of us, we can probably filter those questions and punt them off to staff, or David Riley is actually here with us this afternoon as well from SGL Consulting. He's part of the he's a lead on the consulting team together with Dillon Consulting, and you know we're happy to have his expertise and knowledge here as well. And then we have several you know supporting staff members here, and like to also thank them in advance for their participation today.
Thank you, Mrs. Kimball. I do need a mover for the motion. Councillor Duguay.
I'd be happy to move the sorry, I'm going to go to the report. Is it, Madam Chair, the recommendations?
The recommendations on page 7 of the report.
I'd be happy to move that motion for our meeting purposes. Thank you.
For discussion. Thank you very much. And then we'll proceed to section 1. Is your question about section 1?
A question based on what we've just heard from staff, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Through you, Chair Parnell, to Ms. Kimball, Carolyn, thank you, and Brad, thank you so much for the really great call yesterday. In terms of the facilities, services, and matter, the sort of gray area there, do you think it makes sense, because I've been thinking about this since our conversation, do you think it makes sense to keep it sort of open-ended in terms of how that reserve is handled and how those funds are prescribed? Do you think it makes sense to keep it open-ended for like a pilot term, so to have like a year where it's sort of more open-ended, and then come back to council in a year to sort of say, this is what we've learned, these are the problems in how to distribute that reserve through the different categories of the facility, services, and matter? Do you think it makes sense to have it more loose and then come back to council with a more defined plan based on how that year goes?
Director Appleby.
Madam Chair, I will allow Ms. Kimball to add comments, but I do think there's merit in the approach of sort of reviewing our implementation process, you know, what we learned after about a year of working with the bylaw, and then reporting back to council on a variety of matters, one of which could be the facility services matters.
Did you have something to add, Mrs. Kimball?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Burke, I'm not sure if that is the question that you're asking. Yeah, my understanding is that, are you asking whether or not collecting the actual facility service and matter or a cash in lieu contribution and putting that money into a reserve fund? Is that the nature of your question, or are you simply asking
Well, I think that I think, hello. I think in your comments, you were saying that it was still one of the things that staff had to define for the final draft. And whether the money goes into a reserve or goes directly to a specific portion of those facility services matters. I know there's public art, an indigenous portion. I know there's an affordable housing portion. But when I talked to staff, it was sort of unclear as to whether it was staff or the developer that was deciding where that money went, whether the money just went cash in lieu into a reserve. There was a few options that were floating around, and it's my understanding that none of those were determined yet specifically. And so my question was like, do you think we should keep it pretty open-ended with what that part of this process looks like, and then come back to council after a year to sort of say, well, this is how it's functioning, and this is how it could serve the community better? Because those facilities, services, and matter, that's the real trade-off for getting rid of the public consultation here and allowing things to move more quickly. That's the trade-off. And I think it's a very important part of the plan. It feels to me like it's an undetermined part of the plan in terms of how it works.
through the chair, I'll take a stab at this first, and maybe others can chime in. With respect, so this bylaw, as we know, provides us a tool and an opportunity to collect community benefits, or what we are referring to as facility services and matters, in exchange for additional building height in either a Class 2 or a Class 3 permit scenario. And so the legislation, although it allows us to do that, it says that that relationship between that additional building height that a developer is receiving and the community benefit that's being provided in exchange for that has to be a proportional relationship. So insofar as the current version, the current draft of the bylaw goes, what is being proposed is that in a Class 2 permit situation, which is a staff-approved permit, the staff can negotiate for affordable housing, and what we heard at the end of March is that we also want to broaden that to allow staff to collect green development standard improvements in exchange for facilities, or in exchange for the additional building height, or the applicants can provide a cash in lieu contribution. So the bylaw right now prescribes a cash in lieu amount of $200,000 per affordable unit. And in the instance of a Class 2 permit, the developer would have the option alternatively to provide 20% of the additional units that are created as a result of the additional height as affordable in an ownership building. So a plan, a condominium or a condominium apartment building, or 10% of the additional units if it is a rental, if it's a rental building. And so the developer has the option of either providing those units or the cash in lieu. In the instance where a cash in lieu contribution is received, that money would be required to go into a reserve fund and earmarked for affordable housing, or potentially green development standards, or a CIP related to green development standards. Or sorry, development or green development, green development standards. In the class 3 situation, the way the bylaw is drafted today, council has the opportunity to consider a whole host of other options in exchange for that building height, including affordable housing, including green development standards, but there is a list in the bylaw that provides sort of some parameters upon which council can negotiate with the developer what is provided in exchange for that that additional building height. And just pointing out in the class 3 scenario, the building heights are right now not capped. So it's unlimited right now as the draft bylaw stands today. It sounds like we're heading towards a class 3 cap, but it'll be higher than what's afforded under class 2. And class 3 is a council approved permit. So there has been discussion about the challenges of actually determining what is the appropriate amount and you know what is, so taking public art for instance, what is the value of that public art versus what we could otherwise require as affordable housing units, and is that the priority for that particular development? Or what is the value of actually the introduction of those green development standards that are being proposed as a component of that development? And so to lessen the burden of review by council and by staff, the thought is that we could move in a direction where the option is simply either provide the affordable housing units or provide a cash in lieu amount. That cash in lieu amount can be earmarked in a reserve bylaw that council would pass, and we expect to bring a reserve bylaw back to this council at the time that the bylaw is coming forward for final approval. And council can decide whether it be annually, semi-annually, whatever it likes to determine how that money is spent. And insofar as that money is spent in accordance with that list of facility services and matters, you know, that would be in accordance with that reserve bylaw. I know, I'm sorry it was a long-winded answer, but that is what is being contemplated now through the revised version of the bylaw.
Okay, so we're well into your second 5 minutes there. Did you have another question? You're okay for now? Okay, thank you. Mayor Leal?
Quickly, I see it's just about 2 o'clock. Through Madam Chair to Ms. Kimball, one of the most important aspects of this will be the $200,000 per unit for affordable housing. I think that's paramount in all this. When we develop the reserve bylaw, can it be prescribed in that reserve bylaw that money is transferred that would go to the Peterborough Housing Corporation or non-for-profit housing providers? Because it seems to be going forward, those are the vehicles for affordable housing. Can we get that granular as we move forward in this process?
Mrs. Kimball, did you want to tackle that one?
Sure,
It's fine. If you want to get back to me down the road after you've looked at that, that's fine too.
Yeah, that can be considered. Now, the other options might look like a CIP program that's set up, you know, funneling additional monies into the affordable housing CIP. Or, yeah, there are options that council could consider in the reserve bylaw. And ultimately, you know, I would suggest that insofar as it is earmarked for affordable housing, how that actually happens is something that is the prerogative of council to decide.
Thank you. one other note I meant to ask of all of you, as we're going to start going through the sections, starting with one, if you could quote, if you have a question on a certain page, quote the bylaw page number, not necessarily the report page number, and then everybody will be on the same bylaw page for the questions and answers. Do you have a question for section 1?
I do,
Okay,
Chair.
Go
Thank
ahead,
you.
please, section 1.
So I just have an addition for the list of definitions that are here. Just because it's quite a detailed glossary of definitions, and we have the word tree defined and we have the word dog kennel defined. I didn't see that the climate action plan is listed at all. And when it's something that it really prescribes so much of what we would be doing in terms of green development incentives, I think it would be valuable to at least define what our Climate Action Plan 2.0 is, because it's not just EV charging stations as an incentive for class 2 and 3. It could have to do with heat pumps, solar panels, passive geothermal. Like there are lots of things that pertain to development that our Climate Action Plan 2.0 recommends. So I would ask if I could, through you, Chair, our environment climate specialist, James Byrne, is here. And I wanted to ask James, I appreciated the list in our memorandum that we got here last night that it aligns with Climate Action Plan 2.0. But could you be specific, James, about items that are in our Climate Action Plan that actually are applications, or it could be direct applications to the CPPS, besides EV charging readiness? Thank you.
We are in the definition section of the bylaw.
Hi, through you, Chair. I wasn't prepared. The Climate Change Action Plan 2.0, one of the first and foremost main actions in that plan is increasing density in the city. Density provides many community benefits for the occupant of the let's say a apartment building that would provide that person with, and the community writ large, with a more decarbonized lifestyle through walking, through public transit, closer to your place of work. If the density is being seen in the central area. So that's the first main lift the Climate Change Action Plan seeks to have in the community, which does align with the CPPS.
And can you speak to any other recommendations that might apply to green development in buildings?
Through you, Madam Chair. Other key things that the Climate Change Action Plan would extol would be the decarbonization of heating fuels, which could be seen through the use of heat pumps or geothermal, as it's called, to reduce the amount of emissions associated with heating. And then also the heat pumps can provide cooling, so it's a double use. So that would be in a green development standard. That would be a key measure that would be included in that.
And solar panels as well?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Solar panels are a great use to utilize energy that is produced at the location of the building instead of using the provincial grid. The grid does have greenhouse gas emissions associated with energy production. So using solar panels, the electricity produced on site would be zero emission.
Thank you very much, James. And I've so appreciated all the work that you've done and that we've done within this area through our peak committee and through all of your intensive work. And the council has wholeheartedly endorsed. So thank you for that. And I trust, and just a question to Ms. Kimball and Brad Appleby, will there be ongoing consultations between now and June when the second draft is done, to implement the items that James has expressed into potential incentives for Class 2 and Class 3? That's my question for you, Chair.
Somebody want to tackle that one? We're into the second 5 minutes.
Through the chair to Councillor LaChica. Yes, so the thought at this point, from a staff's perspective is that, and it sort of touches upon the question that Councillor Bierk had, is that we would potentially pose to utilize the facility services and matters charge, which is the in-kind contribution, to fund CIP programs that would be generated in consultation with James and his staff to incorporate or incentivize those green development standards. Because as you know, we have no authority to require those under the bylaw. And there is a legal challenge with respect to actually incorporating it as a condition of a CPP bylaw or a CPP permit. So insofar as that makes it into the reserve bylaw onto a list, we can set up associated outside of the bylaw, we can set up CIP programs that would incentivize green development standards and introductions of those into developments within specified areas.
Thank you. And if I may, through you, Chair. So yes, thank you. But in terms of language that's visible within the CPPS, I think it's important. And if I were to be able to move a motion, I would like to move a motion that this be listed, the things that are itemized, applications, climate action plan, a definition, what it is that we passed, applications to the CPPS, the things, heat pumps, solar panels, passive geothermal, EV charging, readiness, that they be listed not as conditions, but as incentives and items that could be negotiable with developers in Class 2 and Class 3, because there are developers that are interested in that, and we are going in those directions anyway in our landscape. So that's what I would ask, and that's what I would like to move informally, since I don't believe the chair is going to allow for council to discuss and pass motions on things that seem reasonable. I would like to ask that also be added to the definitions, and within as you were saying, the cash in lieu listing of possible negotiating items alongside, of course, top of the list, affordable housing. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Byrne. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. So we are in definitions, and if you could please keep your question to definitions at the moment, and if you have a page number, it's helpful. I have Councillor Crowley, Councillor Riel, Duguay, and Burke on definitions, please.
Thank you, Chair. Through you on page 23, lodging house. I know I had a conversation with you, or through you, Chair, to Ms. Kimball and Director Appleby. And my question was concerning the language in here, how it says that it's any type of dwelling unit that contains 5 or more individual bedrooms offered for rent to a lodger, which sort of leaves a bit of a loophole, because that essentially means that anything with potentially 3 or 4 bedrooms is considered a dwelling unit as opposed to a lodging unit, which seems a little bit counterintuitive to me. I know that we have areas we've identified these strategic growth areas as areas for densification. And, my hope would be that we would limit those lodging houses to the areas that are identified as a strategic growth area. Not to take up too much time, Chair, but could we potentially, through our talk about licensing, can we look at changing that?
Mrs. Kimball, please.
Through the chair to Councillor Crowley, lodging houses are the proposed definition of lodging house in the bylaw and the listing of that as a permitted use right now complies or conforms to the fire code definition, the building code definition, and our current zoning bylaw definition for a lodging house. So simply changing the language to encompass other types of residential rental units is a little trickier than just amending the definition. It has that ripple effect. And so I think we can have a look at the definition insofar as it conforms to, fire code, building code definitions and so on, but it has a very specific meaning under other pieces of legislation that and attached to our, specific regulatory requirements. So I think we can have a look at the definitions, but we certainly, I'm just warning you that we do need to ensure some sort of conformity with other pieces of legislation.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I would just like to say that I really think that this is something that I would love to take another look at. And if there is a coordinated effort between multiple departments in order to have this changed and amended, I would strongly encourage and support staff's endeavor to attempt to do so. I think we need to amend the definition of what a lodging house is through multiple departments and remove the option to have one in a neighborhood and relocate those to strategic growth areas or permit them in strategic growth areas. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Riel.
Kimball, we're talking about definitions, but also you made a statement here, and certainly, can you clarify for me that the bylaw is already written? And then how would we if we made a motion, how it would be shared and how would it be even implemented into the CPPS after the bylaw? This is me saying that the bylaw has already been written.
Through the chair to Councillor Riel, the draft version of the bylaw has been put together and distributed to the public in January of this year and shared with council, of course. We had a formal public meeting on that in March, but it continues to be revised and refined as we look towards the June approval date by council. So there is ongoing consultation. We've received multiple comments, almost 200 pages of comments from the public, from councillors, agencies, et cetera. So we're working through the comments, and some people have questions, so we're working through those. And we expect to address those in a revised version of the bylaw, which will come forward and be made public by the beginning of June, so that folks will have an opportunity to have a look at sort of where we've landed. But I do want to point out that, again, that it is a living document. So, if something is missed or if we need to undertake a more comprehensive review of things like lodging houses and rental units, those can occur in the future. And, it could result in some tweaks or changes to the bylaw as housekeeping amendments further, once after the bylaw is adopted. So I guess that's my response. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to add to that. Brad?
Madam Chair, I might just add to that. So as the conversation's ongoing here, we're keeping track, as you're suggesting proposed amendments, a couple have been suggested so far. We're keeping track of them. If it gave council some comfort, we could kind of, gather those proposed amendments into kind of a summary motion, if you will, kind of written in a way that essentially says, council is requesting that staff review these and report back, these potential amendments and report back in June with the final bylaw on their implementation, just to acknowledge that this is, these are amendments that you would like us to consider.
Okay, Councillor Rail, Councillor Duguay.
Thank you, Chair Parnell. Specific to definitions, just as a general comment to staff. In another capacity, I read bylaws, many of them, and this bylaw, the way staff are outline and organize a definition section, alphabetized with illustrations, well done. It's easy to follow, much easier than we have today. I would like to follow up though on Councillor Crowley's comment with respect to lodging house and to Mrs. Kimball's comment, Chair Parnell, where she referenced applicable law. Can we, to staff in lodging house, would it be appropriate within the definition to reference that it would requiring licensing? I think we want to make that distinction. We don't have to specify the license type of licensing. And I am concerned, Councillor Crowley, that if we suddenly, it's a 3 or 4 bedroom, as Mrs. Kimball said, this becomes really complicated. And I think the distinction should be made as what needs to be licensed or not. So my question to staff, could we add to the definition just that subject to licensing, or would be subject to a license?
Commissioner Potts, please.
I think that would be taken under advisement. I can make one general comment. What the thing is different than how it should be regulated, for example, under a licensing section. And the problem with including in the definition a standard, such as a licensing requirement, might actually render the definition useless, if that makes sense. It's a common sort of issue we have to be mindful of in drafting, but the concept of licensing, whether, how, I think would be taken under advisement.
Chair Parnell, I'm encouraged by that because this is can be a thorny issue. It visits all neighborhoods, and I'm not focusing on that that particular definition. Other than that, those are my general comments on this section. Thank you.
Thank you. To definitions, Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Chair. I have a sort of comment to staff about definitions, and I might have missed it, but I don't see a definition for public art. And I think we have a definition that we used for the mixed use design guidelines that talks about public art. And I think that if this is one of the trade-offs we're going to ask as a facility, service, and matter, I think I may be wrong, but should we not have a pretty clear-cut definition in the bylaw as to what we mean by public art?
Mrs. Kimball.
Through you, Chair, we can explore that further. Sure.
Councillor Chica.
Thank you very much, Chair Parnell. This is just a comment in response to you, through you, Chair, to Director Appleby, regarding the taking of the information and having a list of motions, appreciating all that. But I'm just wondering, because we just have this January draft and the portal's been open to take more public comments, because this is an information gathering from council, discussion on questions that council's brought forward, and several potential additions and some adjustments and tweaks. Should we not, by the end of May, have staff come back with the second draft so that we can view that, so the public can have the opportunity to see what that second draft is before we're able to approve it in June? I just think that we need to consider having an adequate time frame to be able to review a second draft that has current revisions that are meaty and substantial, that could be viewed by the end of the May. Through you, Chair, is that possible, Director Appleby?
Madam Chair, through you, sorry for the delay on that. So our intent is to have a draft of the bylaw ready for end of May, beginning of June. It could come to council at that time. The challenge with doing that is that the bylaw itself probably not be ready until almost that very day. And so in terms of bringing kind of a report along with it, and the reporting deadlines that would come along with it, we might be challenged with that. But yes, there would be a document available at about end of May that could be shared with council.
Through you, Chair, with council and with the public, correct?
Madam Chair, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. Kimball, did you want to do some introduction on section 2, please?
Sure. So section 2 is the administration section. It outlines the process by which a CPP permit is approved. It incorporates things like transition provisions. It explains the 3 different classes of permits. It identifies those types of developments that are exempt from the bylaw, how we deal with variations, what kind of notice requirements are identified through the bylaw, and the delegated approvals for each of the various classes. So we'll open the floor to questions on that section now.
Okay, thank you. And I would note that many of the questions that were submitted to staff are in this section, so we already have a lot of your answers for section 2. Councillor Crowley, you have the floor to administrative.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I believe it's section 291. Forgive me, I just lost the page. 291,
63.
63, correct. And I believe that one of the questions that I had was regarding the a proposed development or discretionary use will only be permitted if it has regard for provincial and municipal guidelines. And I also had a question regarding including language that would reference Climate Action Plan 2.0. And I believe through you, Chair, Director Appleby, you had proposed a change to C. I know we're not making a motion today. However, could you include that language in the change of the CPP to say that the proposed development has regard for provincial and municipal guidelines, technical studies, including the Climate Action Plan 2.0, and is consistent with applicable municipal policies and bylaws? Basically just what you wrote, which is great.
Madam Chair, we will take that under advisement. I'm going to note that right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Duguay, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair Parnell. To my colleagues at a recent portfolio meeting where we met with Commissioner Nelson and staff, one of the matters raised at the meeting, and I believe it falls under the administration section, is that we are introducing to the community call it a new zoning bylaw. It's equivalent of a zoning bylaw, and there will be some systematic changes with how decisions are made. One of the suggestions made at that meeting is that from the date it takes effect, so we'll call it June 2026, in June 2027, an information report coming back to council, what we've learned, because there may be changes, and this happens where there's administrative changes, some typographical, some housekeeping, there could be some success stories. So this isn't a motion, but more of a directive. It was, Commissioner Nelson, you recall that it was a matter that we and I believe Director Appleby, I originally thought maybe April, you suggested June 2027, and I'd like to recommend that be a matter that we could look forward to the newly elected council in a year's time, what we've learned, how it's working, and that might be an information report that identifies if applicable, any housekeeping or administrative changes. Because to my colleagues, the other thing to bear in mind, there are forthcoming changes to the Planning Act, and like we may be caused to have to change this in any event. But I just wanted to ensure, and I think this is the applicable section where that could be accommodated. Thank you.
Somebody want to speak to that? I believe that was in your next steps in the memo.
Through you, the chair. Yes, I was going to point out that in Commissioner Nelson's memo yesterday, at the end of the memo, he did indicate that staff commit to bringing forward an update report at the 1-year mark to provide information on lessons learned and any recommended adjustments. And so I would suggest that is probably a matter of course, regardless. I don't know, just curious as to whether you think that actually should find its way into the bylaw specifically, or whether that's a procedural matter that can be addressed with direction to staff.
Councillor Duquesne?
Yeah, supplementary, Madam Chair. I wasn't recommending that it would form part of the bylaw per se, but rather a directive, whether it warrants a motion, but a directive for all of us in the public knowing that in a year's time, from the date that the bylaw, the CPPS is implemented in a year's time, that an information or update report would be presented for council's and public's consideration. Thank you. But it does not need to form part of the bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Section 2, Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. I just have some questions about the to be determined part for the max building height throughout. That is highlighted in yellow, the notwithstanding provision. My first question, just a brief answer is fine, please, but is that, because the whole point of this plan is that it's built upon upfront consultation. Does the consultation to date give staff enough information to determine what that cap will be? That's my first question. And my second question is, by having this clause in the bylaw, could a developer not still come to council and say, and ask for council's approval to build a building that's higher than this cap that we've set?
Through the chair, with respect to that question about an applicant coming forward that wants to exceed the class 3 building height. So if council imposes a class 3 building height, that would be an application outside of a CPP permit and would require an amendment to the community planning permit bylaw. So that process is available, but it's outside of the actual CPP permit process.
My first question was around the idea that this bylaw being built upon upfront consultation, does the consultant and the staff feel that they have enough information through that consultation to determine what that cap would be, or does this require further work from you to determine that?
Through the chair to Councillor Bierk, we did engage with the public and with the councillors directly in our working sessions, and we did get some very valuable feedback on what those recommended height limits should be. And we've outlined sort of a draft idea of what that might look like in the memo. I think it's under section or question number 7 in the memo from Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Leal.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And it's an administrative question, 211, 2.11.2. And it's the use of the word shall. I kind of feel there should be perhaps some stronger language used, more mandatory as opposed to shall. But I'll just get a comment from Ms. Kimball and Mr. Appleby. Because the when you sense that the community planning permit system is a planning tool, covering zoning bylaw, site plan control, minor variance approvals in a single permit application, is shall a strong enough word?
Mrs. Kimball, please.
Through the chair to Mayor Leal, yes, from a legislative perspective, shall is considered to be mandatory, and it is described as such in our official plan. So I would suggest that it is strong language, and it is mandatory.
Perfect. Because I asked the question in relationship to delegated authority that it is mandatory.
Thank you very much. Councillor Duguay, you're next.
Thank you, Chair Parnell. Referring thus to page 7 or question 7 of Commissioner Nelson's council comment response, and as a follow-up to a meeting that was held with staff and attended by Councillors Vasiliadis, myself, and Councillor Riel, I had considered, I think what Councillor Burke was also asking, around the question was specific to suburban strategic growth areas. And having read our document, there are a certain maximum height that's permitted as of right within the suburban strategic growth areas. And my concern, Chair Parnell, it's absolutely necessary that we establish a limit of how tall a building council might consider. And it would be understood that if that is established, that a developer in turn would say, I wish to build something taller than that limit under class 3 that council could approve. And my understanding through from Director Appleby that they would be subject then to the traditional rigors, a traditional land use approval process. And the reason I'm stating this, Chair Parnell, is as follows. So I'll use Lansdowne and Ashburnham intersection because I believe it was referenced in our question list. I'll use those. I can use all 4 corners. And it's my understanding, and Director Appleby, if I've misquoted heights, please, you may correct me, but if the maximum height is 15 stories, and if we wish to contemplate and pursue community benefits, the mechanism we use is then establishing from 15 to the nth story, whatever that limit is. That's the bandwidth of which we get to negotiate and consider community benefits. And I had recommended then and still support that the maximum that council would consider is 20-story. And that it's my understanding that so from story 16 to 20, that's the bandwidth of which council through class 3 permit would be able to negotiate, I'll call it the community benefit. Now, if I would continue, colleagues, if I were to continue, say Easterly, and I were to take another property mid-block in the same designation, not having the same prominence, but the same designation, my understanding that that building height, I believe, is set at 10 stories. And I had recommended then and remain supportive that council establish a maximum height of 15 stories. So again, it's the 11th to 15th story. That's the bandwidth within that sort of general property within a suburban strategic growth area where we can discuss and negotiate community benefits. But if a developer does proceed to ask for something above and beyond the council limit, Director Appleby, I believe you did clarify that they would require they would be now operating outside of community planning permit and would not be able to benefit from the benefits that are derived through a combined zoning and site plan process. So if I can ask my question, the last one, is that correct? So if they want 25 stories, and if we establish a limit at 16 or 18 or 20, they'd require different approvals, correct?
Through the chair, that is correct. However, I'll clarify that if council chose to amend the bylaw to accommodate that, then the development approval for that project would then fall within the newly amended bylaw, the newly amended CPP bylaw, and they would require a permit under the newly amended bylaw.
Thank you for that clarification. So if I might, Madam Chair, then my introductory remarks, and I'm cognizant of time, it's absolutely imperative that we need to establish a limit, a council opposed limit within our suburban strategic growth areas. And I'm asking us, for example, to consider Lansdowne and Ashburnham. I'll use that as an interest because it's actually referenced in our, there was questions raised. And if we limit, yeah, I understand if we limit the building height to 15 stories, which is as of right, how do we go about getting community benefits unless we incentivize development, the additional verticality, and that's that bandwidth between 16 to 20. We're telling the marketplace, we're willing to work with you. That's our limit. That's how tall we're prepared to go within the Class 3 permit system. So those are my comments, and I suppose if there's anything supplementary from my colleagues, I'm happy to hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. We are talking about 2.8.6 on page 62 and 63.
And I should have stated that. Thank you.
It's okay. Staff have anything else to add before we move on?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity. I think what I would just add is that if someone comes along and they're seeking a Class 2 permit as opposed to a Class 3, they want to go up to, let's take Lansdowne and Ashburnham as an example. They want to go up to the 15 stories. There is still the opportunity through the Class 2 permit at a staff level for staff to require a facility service and matter collection from that development because they are exceeding the Class 1 height as of right. So there would still be some collection there. I think right now it's targeted for affordable housing, but we were discussing alternatives here today as well.
Okay, thank you. So next I have Councillor Crowley, then Councillor Lachika, then Councillor Hickey. Councillor Crowley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I know one of the questions that I asked was in regards to section 213, which is page 68, 69. And it was regarding as part of the draft CPP bylaw, it would allow an approval to remain in effect for up to 4 years without the start of construction. And one of the questions, or one of the responses that I believe Director Appleby had given was language could be added to this section of the bylaw to indicate where an extension is requested but deemed unjustified, the request may be refused. Can we just maybe, through you, Chair, to Director Appleby, can you highlight that one for your next steps potentially?
Director?
Sorry for the delay. Through the chair, I may call upon Ms. Kimball to add to what I'm about to say, but yes, like essentially permits are intended to have a shelf life. And in the lead up to the expiration date of that, an applicant could come and seek an extension. And it would be, as the bylaw is written right now, up to the director to determine whether that extension should be granted or not.
And is that, so that language is already currently in the CPP draft, or you're saying it could be added?
Through the chair, it is currently in the draft bylaw.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lachika?
Thank you very much, Chair Parnell. This would be in reference to administration, page 72 under 2.1.1 land subject to this bylaw. I'd like to recommend an addition because we know our official plan directs in 7.1 a duty to consult and accommodate to achieve reconciliation. To meet UNDRIP's free, prior, and informed consent expectations. I think it's important to apply or use the language, apply First Nations protocols, because it's not only the city of Peterborough, it's Treaty 1, Williams Treaty, First Nations and Indigenous, urban Indigenous First Nations, Indigenous people. So I'm just thinking it would be useful in the administration section, just because it doesn't exist anywhere in this document, in the draft document, that we say that. And also to say that Indigenous communities are often overwhelmed by the scale and pace of expected consultations. And so they may need to appropriately participate in the CPPS process. And subject to their direction, they may need appropriate resources through some consultation fees that we need to keep in mind. And that goes beyond a mere notification or invitation to pre-consultation. So my recommendation again is that it would be worthwhile to add additional references in the text to apply First Nations protocols. So as a phrase, that it would be useful to have that included somewhere in land subject to this bylaw under administration, so that that acknowledgement is visible and the language is there and we know that that's part of what we're doing. Is that possible, Ms. Kimball, through you, Chair?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor LaChica, we can incorporate provisions in the pre-consultation sections of the bylaw to acknowledge that we will include First Nations, for example, through the pre-consultation stage. Is that, I'm just wanting some clarification. Is that what you're looking for?
Well, and I guess I just thank you through you, Chair, to Ms. Kimball. I think that we need to have a protocol for significant CPPS applications that come forward. And so that we need to think that through, and that language needs to be visible in our administration, that we have a protocol around prior and informed consent. Because that's what our official plan requests and requires and demands. And I think it's an acknowledgement of the processes that you've already begun, that it would be somehow visible in language in our CPPS, even if it's in a phrase or a short paragraph, and then that would be repeated as needed through the CPPS consultation process. I also think, if I may, through you, Chair, when we get the feedback at the end of May or beginning of June, it would be great to hear what the outcome was from pre-consultation on the CPPS in general, from the Indigenous consultation work that went on, so that we as a council can listen and learn and hear what First Nations have felt about it and what their comments were, if it could be done in a distilled way. Is that possible, Ms. Kimball?
Through the chair to Councillor Chica, yes, we've engaged with our First Nations through a series of roundtable discussions, and the implementation is very much, top of list in terms of incorporating and involving our First Nations, and how do we best accommodate for that, recognizing, their challenges from a consultation perspective in terms of, all the municipalities that they have to respond to. So we are actually working through an implementation plan with First Nations right now. And we've circulated survey questions to them specifically to seek some guidance on what types of applications they want to remain involved with, and to what extent that involvement will look like. So there is ongoing discussion with First Nations about their capacity to involve themselves in the process. And that will be reflected in the implementation plan.
Thank you. And so I just want to clarify, will we as a council be hearing some of their reflections so that we can listen, learn, and be respectful of just that we're making governance decisions around a new zoning bylaw, that it's a partnership. So I guess it would be great to know what their feedback was based on the survey that went to them. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, my apologies. Yes, we will. We are definitely intending to incorporate that into the What We Heard report that will be attached to the June report that's coming to council. So that summary will be included.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kimball.
Thank you, Director Appleby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just had a question for Councilor LaChica. I've made a note here regarding the suggestion to amend the bylaw to include reference to consultation in accordance with First Nations protocols. I'm just wondering if as part of that, you're also contemplating adding in any language around, thinking about like capacity funding comments that we often hear, whether there is a need to identify who pays for that consultation.
Thank you through you, Chair. Yes, I had alluded to that piece when I initially brought that forward. I think there's due consideration needed around the work that needs to be done on a reconciliation level for us to be considerate of the fact that there's work that we need to do on a budgetary level to consider that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hakey, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to go back to 286, please, which is the height. I have a bit of a different take on it than Councillor Dugay. The concern that I have is that we end up with two systems. One is the CPPS, and then we go outside at a certain height. I think limiting the height could be a problem, and I'll give you an example. The example that Councillor Dugay gave is great. It's on the four corners, very visible. But another location that I know of in town is Goodfellow and Lansdowne, and it's set back. Does it make sense to have 20-story maximum there? I don't know. But what Director Appleby had alluded to was we can contain it and deal with it within the CPPS. Versus setting that height and then going outside of it with a different system to perhaps for the developer to come forward with that. The object was to simplify it. I think the way that it's stated here, with council being able to adjust that height depending on the community benefits, it makes more sense. Those are just my comments. I have spoken with a lot of developers, as Councillor Dugay has, I know. And what they're saying is we really want to be able to come forward with a plan, whatever that is. None of them were talking about a 100-story build or an 80-story build, and I don't think that that's what they were referring to. But one system does make it easier, not only for the development community, but also for council to deal with it. Those are my comments.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dugay.
Thank you, Chair Parnell. Colleagues, on page 18 of Commissioner Nelson's report, question 17, there's a term that's used, and I'm asking it be removed from the report. It was unintended. The term grandfather, we should not be using that in any of our documents. I've learned that it's very racist and it should be removed. So if we can, I think it's really referring to things, something like, let's use the term legal non-conforming. It just troubles me that it's there. So that's one point. To Director Appleby, a couple of times in this section, you've referenced some word changes and you've used the term be consistent or is consistent with. Director Appleby, can you confirm, is that approach, is it similar to the language found in the 2024 provincial planning statement?
Through the chair, it is.
Perfect. Thank you. I have one other question, one other comment, and I'm not certain, it's in this section, but I can't find an applicable number. But I'd like staff to consider, and colleagues, we could consider a property today that's designated, not listed, but designated. And we have, call it 150 plus or minus. And if any class, if we would be called upon to consider class 3 permits, but a class 2, because in this case, there's going to be other applicable law, Heritage Act, there's other implications. And to me, it's so important, we've heard in these chambers, that I would be recommending that any property building designated pursuant to our Heritage Act, any class 2 or class 3, we would be approving, and we'd also approve class 2. Class 1, which is just minor tweaking, it might just be adjusting a side lot line, not necessarily. We may not, colleagues, I don't know, Chair Parnell, if we're going to receive many of those applications, but I think it warrants appropriate regard for in this section. I couldn't find where, so I can't quote the page number. So I'm wondering, Director Appleby, perhaps if you have any comments about that request or recommendation. Thank you.
Director Appleby?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councillor Duguay for the question. So a couple thoughts. I think what I'm hearing you say is for anything above a class 1 permit, you would like to see that come to council. And if it did come to council, it would just be treated as a class 3, regardless of whether it's really a class 2 build or not. If there's a property that's designated, the Heritage Act, the Ontario Heritage Act still applies. And so if someone is proposing to demolish that building or to physically alter that building in a way that would potentially affect the heritage attributes, there would still be a need to obtain the written permission from the city in order to undertake those actions.
And Chair Parnell, the reason I'm making this recommendation, so, and I agree with that language, but if we're attempting to responsibly expedite approvals, so it's a building that's designated, it needs additional regulatory attention through the Heritage Act, and they're applying for a zoning amendment, they're applying for site plan control. Conceivably, we might be able to wrap into that matters under the Heritage Act, again, within that same package. I'm just simply looking at trying to help expedite that approval, but have the decision culminate resting here with council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burke?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the previous speaker's idea. I think it would be great. I agree with it. I would, if it was in the form of a motion, I would support the motion, and I think others would as well. I'm looking at page 71 of the bylaw. And my question to staff, is that if we're asking a developer to exchange either affordable units or cash in lieu, what safeguards do we have in place so that if a developer is exchanging affordable units to be able to build higher, what safeguards do we have in place to ensure that those affordable units remain in the building? A developer would be able to, sometimes take those affordable units and turn them into market units. Do we have the capacity as a city to stay on top of how that's happening? Is there a time limit for how long those affordable units in the building are required? How do we plan to deal with that, please?
Through the chair to Councillor Burke, the anticipation is that we would require as a condition of the approval of a CPP permit in those instances where affordable housing units are being proposed within the development itself. We would enter into an agreement. One of the conditions would be that the owner enter into an agreement. It's registered on title, and it obligates the owner to ensure its affordability for a 25-year period consistent with what we require for the affordable housing CIP, for example. We've also been speaking with other municipalities about how that works in an ownership situation. So we're taking some lessons from other municipalities as to what those agreements on title would look like.
Thank you. That's really great to hear. And I have a second question around the conversation from a few speakers ago where we were talking about imposing a max building height. And I guess my question is, does it make more sense for us, and I may be naive to this, but would it make more sense to implement a class 4 and just have extreme conditions and extreme exchanges of facility services and matter if you go in a class 4, which is beyond the class 3 height limits, instead of just putting a building height on it?
Through the chair to Councillor Bierk, I'm having a little bit of a hard time differentiating what the difference would be between a class 3 limit and a class 4 if they're both require a council approval. I would suggest then, you know, if council doesn't want to limit the building heights in it for a CPP bylaw, just to leave it open versus actually imposing a building height.
I think just to cut in through the chair, I think the idea is that with all this streamlining that we're allowing the development community, the community is getting an exchange from that. We are exchanging this fast tracking, this lack of public consultation, the increased building height. We are exchanging that for facility services that matter. And the way that I'm understanding it is that if there is a building that goes beyond whatever cap council maxes out, there's no structure for us as a council to be able to impose any facility services that matter on a 25-story building. Not in the way that I'm understanding it or reading it.
Through the chair to Councillor Bierk, for clarification, an amendment to the CPP bylaw would be required in the instance if council imposes a class 3 height limit, an applicant proposes something beyond that, an amendment would have to be approved before council, and then it bounces it back into the CPP bylaw for the actual permit for the development. So we still have an opportunity, and even at the higher building height, to require the facility services and matters. That would be inherent in the amendment to the CPP bylaw, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to interpretation. It's section 3 on page 79. Mrs. Kimball, did you want to do an intro, please?
Sure, through you, Chair. Section 3 is the interpretation section. So it provides the reader with an understanding of how the bylaw is to be interpreted, what forms part of the bylaw, what the various precincts, how they're denoted in the bylaw. It lists the schedules incorporated into the bylaw and the appendices, etc. So be happy to entertain any questions or concerns.
Okay, thank you. So are there any questions between 79 and 84? Councillor Duguay.
Thank you, Chair Parnell. Briefly to either Mrs. Kimball or Mr. Appleby. I'm assuming written in here it's understood that from time to time there is some flexibility interpreting a boundary of a zoning schedule similar to an official plan schedule.
Do you want to tackle that?
Through you, the chair, I was waiting for a bit more, but I'm assuming, Councillor Duguay, that you're wanting some clarification as to what happens with the boundary. There are examples of properties that have sort of what we've currently referred to as a split zoning, where 2 precincts apply to the same property, different portions of the property. So the interpretation section is intended to clarify that that boundary, although it's not to be considered or treated as a property line, the permitted and discretionary uses and the development standards for each of the various precincts on the property would still apply to those areas of that particular parcel.
That is very helpful. Thank you.
Clear.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Leal.
Much, Madam Chair. Just a small thing to Ms. Kimball. I assume in the final version, ORCA will be replaced with the new Conservation Authority. I just want to prevent another expensive reprinting in about a year's time.
Yes, I think through you, the chair, to the mayor, I think that has already been pointed out. So we will make those changes in the final edition of the bylaw.
Thank you for the recommendation and the notes. Councillor Burke.
Thank you. I have a question actually about parking, so I'll go on the list for that section, please.
Okay, we'll wait for parking. Councillor Chica, section 3.
Thank you very much, Chair Parnell. This is partly under interpretation, and it will be partly under general provisions as well. But since we're talking about precincts and the appendices, this is related to natural areas and natural hazard overlay. There had been a request around mapping because of our official plan delineating in Schedule E about absolute protection of those natural heritage areas. And I guess there was a question whether mapping could be done so that those places would be absolutely out of bounds and not available for development, because that is what our official plan, those features are to be protected and not developed within the official plan. So that's the level A protections that there's concern about. And if there would be mapping created, and I believe there was some conversation with Jasmine about mapping that could be easily created to just delineate that so that those level A features would be protected. I know there's mention of environmental impact studies, but those can be arbitrary, and depending on who's doing them, it can be a slippery slope. So I guess the concern, in Schedule B and the rules around different land uses, it doesn't feel like that would be good enough about the environment impact study because it isn't necessarily going to be ultimately protecting those level A features that are outlined in our official plan. So just a question about that mapping. Is it possible to have that mapping done as has been communicated via some stakeholders in the community around the environment? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Through the chair to Councillor Chica, there has been quite a bit of discussion about the natural heritage overlay, which is what's driving and it is reflective and identical to the natural areas overlay in the city's official plan. So insofar as conformity to the official plan, the bylaw, the appendix, natural areas overlay appendix, is identical to that which you see in the official plan. I think what the question is what kind of levels of protection do we afford to those natural areas? And essentially, and I'll open the floor to our planning ecologist who is here to answer some questions after I take a first kick at it here. So essentially, there are two different precincts that implement the natural areas overlay. And they would include the open space precinct in the bylaw, which permits a very limited type of development. And then the environmental protection precinct, which is, really limits the development potential of a property to, absolutely nothing. Pretty much. It protects the environmental integrity. In order for us to assign the environmental protection, the property and the features of the property, the environmental features of the property will have to be evaluated and properly mapped. So they have to be ground truthed. So there are instances where there are lands that may have been ground truthed, and we are in ongoing discussions with our planning ecologists about those scenarios. So there is likely to be an update to the environmental precinct layer of this bylaw. but it would not be appropriate to assign an environmental precinct to all properties that are otherwise identified as natural areas because they haven't gone through that evaluation process. And I'd like to turn it to Jasmine Gibson, who is our planning ecologist, maybe to expand
Yeah,
upon that.
If I may, thank you, Ms. Kimball. Just before Jasmine speaks, I'm referring to, there are some misalignments of mapping that are observable in terms of the Trent University. The major institutional precinct is expanded in the natural sanctuary to cover more of the natural areas with less ZP. The Fleming College, the southwest corner of Dobbins Woods, is an example. Harper Park, south of the park, goes from open space to mostly institutional in the precinct. And there are other examples illustrated in the maps in the appendix that there just is some discrepancy in the mapping. So there's just a concern about those level A, very sensitive natural heritage zones that we would want to see ultimately protected from development, period. Thank you, Jasmine, for comments and just assurances that you might provide. Thank you.
So I had similar discussions with Reimagine Peterborough, and we have provided that kind of direction to our planning team. A lot of those areas are the same hotspots that we identified, and a lot of those features, so level A feature in our natural heritage system, are usually denoted to provincial or municipal significance. A lot of our wetlands in our jurisdiction go through the wetland evaluation process. So that is on the ground vetted information. To be clear, our natural heritage system mapping is considered an overlay because it's a planning tool. It's a mapping tool that picks up geographical spatial data of hotspots of where biodiversity is located. And then we look at underlining features that are there, but it's at a regional scale. So when a Planning Act application comes to council, we need to know what's happening on the ground so that we know exactly where that feature sits, where buffers or other mitigation strategies should be applied, which actually go beyond that NHS mapping. And then that's that fine tuning scale that we need, right? And right now, all we have to work with is wetland evaluations that have been approved previously by M&R. That kind of mapping we can use to update that area at Trent for sure, because that has been vetted. It's been put into what's called the LEO database. So that's the data that our geomatics folks use to map our online mapping tool. And then to your point, Harper Park and Harper Wetland has gone through an updated process that we vetted with Ian Boland's team. So that has to go through another process before we actually get it embedded into LEO. And then there are some spots that we also flagged at Fleming that, you know, do have those natural heritage overlays. So we're in that process. It's just it's a natural layers change, they're living systems, so they do have to go through a modification. You know, the mapping would have to be revised on an annual basis.
Jasmine, through you, Chair, we thank you for all your work on this. And I'm just wondering, because, you know, I think there's a like-mindedness around the work that Reimagine's been doing, as you mentioned, that communication will be ongoing so that they recognize that as well. That would be amazing.
Yeah, we also work with them on other projects. Like the Jackson
so
Park
great.
Management Plan.
And yeah, I know that they were curious to hear back about the mapping. So thank you very much for your vigilance on that. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. We're still on section 3, interpretation. And I have Mayor Leal, and then Councillor Crowley, then Councillor Duguay.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. It's to Ms. Kimball, it's a question on mapping. And it's a specific area, the south side of Lansdowne Street, east of Ashburnham Drive to Highway 115. You know, there's Kingdon Timber Mart, Tormount, a number of what I would call manufacturer, heavy industrial uses that are on that southern stretch of Lansdowne Street. And in terms of the mapping or interpretation of the mapping in that area.
Mrs. Kimball?
Yeah, sure. Through the chair to Mayor Leal. So the mapping for the CPP bylaw was informed in large part by the underlying official plan designations of these lands. So the official plan has assigned Lansdowne Street East in the corridor that you had suggested. For the lands fronting along Lansdowne Street East are largely within the major mixed-use corridor designation in the official plan, and contemplates, a significant amount of growth, including sensitive land uses, like residential. So a mix of commercial and residential uses, essentially. The lands to the south of that are designated in our official plan as general employment. And so they do include some industrial permissions. And there has been some discussions with some of those landowners as of recent with respect to our approach in the bylaw. And staff is coming forward with some recommended changes to the bylaw that will clarify what types of studies, what those influence areas are for between sensitive land uses and employment uses, and what kind of studies we will be requiring. They're in accordance with the provincial planning statement and with the D6 guidelines that the province has set out for those land use compatibility studies. So there is added language you'll see on the slide above here, added language that requires the study. It will essentially actually trigger the elevation of an application where a study is required. That study or that application for the CPP permit will be automatically moved into a class 3 permit level, so that council has the authority to make that decision. And the benefit of that is that there is additional public notice provisions recommended in the bylaw for a class 3 permit. So adjacent landowners will be notified and we'll have the opportunity to perhaps, look at the land use compatibility study and the mitigative measures that are potentially being proposed to address any compatibility issues. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak.
Through you,
to
Madam
that.
Chair, then
Yeah.
that language and all in the mapping will all be clarified in the final version in June, I take it? You, Madam Chair?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Mayor Leal, yes, we are proposing to incorporate that, and there is already an ongoing matrix of comments that we've been receiving together with sort of the response and any implications to the draft bylaw. So that will all be attached to the report that comes forward in June.
Madam Chair, I asked the question of context. There's a building that's owned by Habitat for Humanity, and there's a real question of whether housing is compatible with everything else along that a particular strip, Madam Chair, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Duguay, we're still on section 3.
Thank you, Chair Parnell. A follow-up to Mayor Leal's commentary and concerns regarding the Lansdowne Street East section, south side, east of Ashburnham. Council is aware of the recent Ontario Land Tribunal decision, and having read it in its entirety more than once, admittedly, I'm still struggling with how we could possibly consider a sensitive land use, that in this case residential in proximity to industrial uses, given that decision. Should we be considering once and for all and the bold step? And I don't necessarily like eliminating residential opportunity, but is this the right place in this case, given that OLT decision to still consider and be promoting residential, notwithstanding Mrs. Kimball, the outline of all the extra measures. But realistically, if residential was contemplated on the north side of the road and giving Toromont another industrial, are we going to run into potentially the same challenge we did last time with the potential of appeal, particularly in light of that precedent-setting OLT decision?
Director Appleby, please.
Madam Chair, through you, thank you for the question. So my suggestion would be that planning for residential within that mixed-use corridor is not out of the question. It is still very much on the table. It was certainly part of council's vision when the official plan was adopted in 2021 and approved by the province in 2023. When we review the provincial planning statement, we see that there is, an encouragement of this sort of mixing of uses where you can demonstrate the compatibility. And so what we are working to do through this bylaw is to ensure that the proper tests, the proper studies are done before permission is given for, to actually build on the ground, say, a residential use. It needs to be proven that it can be made compatible. The path example that you're referring to is one specific case, and it was attempted to be sort of developed and proven in one specific way. There could be other ways to demonstrate compatibility, and so I think every case needs to be reviewed on its own merits. I also think there is an acknowledgement in the official plan and through implementing with this bylaw that we are planning for a longer term horizon. We are planning out to 2051 with the official plan, and land uses change over time. And so what we are trying to do is ensure that we're future ready, both with this bylaw and in accordance with the official plan.
Madam Chair, with that explanation in mind, I'm satisfied, at least for the time being, that there are measures available to the municipality, potentially to the industrial employers and others, but it may come down to that it simply cannot, that the compatibility may not be possible. And I just wanted to make, my colleagues aware that is a real possibility. I'm not prepared to table removing it, but as a cautionary note, we're going to have to pay close attention to this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're still on section 3. Now, Councillor Burke, you had your hand up. Did you want to speak to 5 parking? Okay, so I'll keep you on the list for when we get to 5. And Councillor Crawley, you wanted to speak to 4 when we get there. Okay, Councillor Riel, did you want to speak to 3?
Through the chair, I appreciate Councillor Duguay for bringing this up. We've already received a letter from Toromont. We've already received a letter from Timber Mart of cautionary to the city here. Toromont has already told the city that they're watching the CPP and what we're doing here, and they have a Bay Street lawyer firm on record. So they don't want any imposition that's going to affect them, or if they want to build on their property. They won a case at the OLT, and they're standing on that. But also Timber Mart came along and said, look, we're looking for expansion. So I have to agree with Councillor Duguay that side of the road, not the north side, which is residential, but the south side should be left industrial commercial. And I think something has to be done. This here, what you're telling me doesn't give me any faith or any feeling that something's going to be done, because we could end up in court with a lawsuit from Toromont that they're saying we want protection from the lands that we have that we want to build. And I think that I sent that to you from them, from their general manager to me, to staff, to caution you that this is what I was given to me and shared with the planning department. They want some sort of comfort that the lands that they have there are industrial lands.
Any comment from consultants or staff?
Madam Chair, I think the only comment I'll make is that we have had conversations with Tormont, and I think they've been quite productive.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to section 4, which is general provisions. And did you want to do a little intro, Mrs. Kimball?
Sure. Section 4 is the general provisions section of the bylaw. It includes and it largely reflects a lot of the general provisions that you would see today in the comprehensive zoning bylaw. It includes provisions related to municipal services being required, legal non-conforming and legal non-complying lots, and if those expansions and enlargements to those types of things. It speaks to things like the Jackson Creek Special Policy Overlay, vegetation protection zones, and accessory uses, etc. So ARUs are included within this section of the bylaw. There's provisions related to home-based businesses, group homes, model homes, our neighborhood supportive uses, utilities, etc. So we'd be happy to take any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you. And section 4 is page 85 to 100. And I'm noting the time, it's 3:22, so please keep your comments and questions succinct as we move forward. Councillor Crowley, you're up on this one, please.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Page 98, section 447, number of buildings per lot in the neighborhood precinct. Is it possible to also flag the maximum number of bedrooms? I know I'm sort of trying to prevent the explosion of lodging houses, and I sound like an absolute broken record, but is it possible to identify a max number of bedrooms as well in that section?
Staff.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Crowley. The bylaw, insofar as it implements the official plan, is really focusing more on building form rather than sort of the previous focus on numbers of units per lot or the density, the number of units per hectare. So it really, insofar as it implements the official plan, we're not concerning ourselves so much with the number of units on a lot any longer. In fact, you know, that cap has been removed from the neighborhoods precinct, for example, and we're focusing more on built form and compatibility within a neighborhood. Controlling the number of bedrooms per unit is probably contrary to Ontario Human Rights Commission. You know, municipalities are moving away from that sort of level of regulation with respect, and so is the province actually, with respect to even ARUs, for example. So I would strongly advise against it, but you know, we can provide you with a more wholesome response to that in the What We Heard report coming in June.
That's great. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Councillor Burke.
Through the chair, thank you. I have a comment and a question. The first comment is around on page 93 about home-based businesses, and I'll just put it out there. From time to time this term of council, I've received feedback from residents who have home-based businesses, which we're experiencing an increase of post-COVID, and that residents felt like our parameters around home-based businesses were limiting to them. And I'm just wondering if the idea of only allowing one person who is not a resident, ideas like that, it's just a comment to say that I think that it's a very niche demographic of people that have home-based businesses, and it might benefit us to connect with some of these people to sort of understand from their working perspective what they need. And because the people that I've talked to have contacted me, they felt limited by the stipulations around home-based businesses. The second thing I have to say is a question, and it's around the provision on towers. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but I'm wondering does there need to be some language in the towers section around preserving heritage? I know that when I drive down George Street, there's just a beautiful skyline of George Street with the heritage buildings. There's a beautiful way that the clock tower has remained prominent in the downtown. And I'm wondering, and I understand that there is heritage policy that aligns with the CPP, but do you think that when we're talking about provisions and we're mentioning towers, that we should include some language around heritage? Page 99, 4412.
Staff want to comment? Ms. Kibble, please.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Birk. The towers section really focuses on sort of the minimum distance between towers. So spatial separation between towers to facilitate, light and air and avoid sort of a wind tunnel type of effect. I think what you're seeking is some limitation on building heights in proximity to.
I understand what's being considered that is written. What I'm asking is that does staff believe that there's a need to define what is defined in certain heritage policy? Because I asked you that question yesterday, and there is a heritage impact study that would have to happen with the CPP application. But what I'm asking is, since we're in the general provision section, do you think that it would benefit us in the CPP to have some language around what is in the heritage impact requirements in these provisions around towers? So that it's clear to applicants to say that in certain situations, a tower must not block X, Y, and Z, or, that's my question. Thank you.
Through the chair to Councillor Birk, I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think what my response would be is that through this tool, we will require mandatory pre-consultation. And the city is authorized to ask for supporting documentation to support an application and that would come forward at the pre-consultation phase of the process. If a development is in proximity to a designated property like the clock tower, for example, in downtown, we would likely be asking for a heritage impact assessment. And we are committing to actually providing applicants with clear terms of reference for any of those supporting documents that need to be provided as a condition of pre-consultation and to ensure that an application is complete. That terms of reference could outline what you're asking for in terms of the criteria that we want that heritage impact assessment, for example, to consider. There would also typically, for a tall tower, be a bit of an urban design brief. And so that could also, the terms of reference for that brief could dictate, and we can be site specific when we're asking for these things through pre-consultation to identify what exactly it is that we are looking for. I think it would be difficult to anticipate every scenario in the bylaw to make it a condition of the bylaw. And I think trusting the process of pre-consultation and the terms of reference to identify what is required when is probably more productive.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hagy, then Duguay.
Thank you very
Councillor
much,
Hagy.
Madam Chair. Just on the home-based businesses, is there a city business license required currently to operate one out of the house?
Through the chair to Councillor Hagy, there is, for certain businesses, certain types of businesses, there would be licensing requirement, but perhaps not for all types of home-based business.
I know we're getting a bit off topic, so I'll leave it at that right now, but I will follow up later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duguay.
Thank you, Chair Parnell. On the subject of home-based business, when considering our existing zoning bylaw, section 623, and the bylaw was updated by 96, the 77th bylaw. Today, the bylaw does not permit employees. Yeah, in fact, I can just to clarify, some years ago when I established my home-based business, I think I was the only business in the city that applied for a minor variance so I could have a non-resident employee. So Councillor Burke, to your point, we're going from none to one. And I would imagine, Mr. Appleby or Mrs. Kimball, if there was an instance, there's a home-based business, and if they wanted to have a second non-resident employee, they could apply for a minor variance through our system, correct?
Through the chair, that's correct. There is a mechanism for a Class 2 permit to facilitate a variation to any of the general provisions.
Thank you. And to Councillor Hagy, a question about licensing home-based business. When the city updated its home-based business regulations some years ago, the very matter of what should be licensed and not licensed was thoroughly considered. And many municipalities do not license home-based businesses with the exception of specific types where applicable. The concern is if you're starting to license a home-based business, then you have to offer some sort of service in kind inspections. And let's imagine it's a small office. And why would the city even contemplate licensing such an operation? But there are certain types that might warrant licensing. And for whatever it's worth, allowing Councillor Parnell, allowing one non-resident employee for home-based business makes sense to me. It's a good step forward, and I would support same. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this section? Okay. Okay. Saying, oh, sorry. Yes, go ahead, please.
Oh, you know what? I'll withdraw the question. I'll speak to staff offline.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're moving on to section 5, which is parking. Mrs. Kimball, did you want to lead us in, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the parking provisions are largely reflective of the existing parking provisions, as Council is probably aware. There was a parking study that was conducted in, I believe it was 2023 now, fall of 2023, and Council adopted a series of amendments to the zoning bylaw to reflect that parking, with the goal of reducing the number of required on-street or on-site parking spaces for residential uses within the city. So it does largely, it reflects that. It reflects some of the sort of modernization of our parking requirements with respect to accessible parking spaces and introduction of things like secure bicycle parking and so on. So we'll entertain any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you to parking. So far I have Councillor Burke, Lachika, Duguay. Hey, Councillor Burke, you're up first.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Ms. Kimball, thank you. That was one of my questions, was if the updated parking policy was fixed in this, or if it was actually expanded upon. And I'll say this because I attended the Committee of Adjustment meeting this week, and it was kind of shocking to understand some of the requirements imposed on residents who are contemplating ARUs or additions to create additional housing opportunities. It feels like to me there's a need for us to continue to look at this and update it because of some of the sort of dogmatic ways in which we're imposing parking requirements in the downtown core when in fact street parking would be enough. At the end of the day, I believe that we need to encourage residents that want to renovate or add an ARU to be able to do it pretty seamlessly and easily. And it feels like there's still, you know, the planning staff at the meeting wasn't even sure of what the property they were looking at. They couldn't even reference what the parking was, whether it was an hour parking or overnight or bi-monthly side to side. So I think definitely in the downtown core, we need to sort of continue to expand upon modernizing what that looks like if we expect the community at large to sort of step up to the plate and take advantage of the policy we have around ARUs and the policy we have around being able to add additional housing on a residential property. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hakey, please. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Councillor Chica next, sorry.
Thank you very much, Chair Parnell. Just wanted to ask a question, thinking through this parking section. Thank you for all the detail in this. You know, we're trying to build sustainable, compact, walkable cities and so on. I guess my question is, there are cities that are removing parking minimums for non-residential areas and allowing market forces to determine parking provisions on given sites. And I just wondered what your reflections were on this, because you know, we haven't made any changes there. And yeah, I'm just wondering about that, because reducing non-residential parking minimums may very well just help us to support the bylaw implementation more expeditiously. Thanks.
Through the chair to Councillor Chica, as noted, the parking study that was conducted in 2023 was specifically targeting residential parking requirements. The non-residential parking requirements, although, you know, we did introduce some additional provisions where there's efficiencies. If it's a mixed-use building, for example, you know, there's some new accommodation for shared parking facilities, recognizing that peak hours for, you know, those two types of uses are usually at alternate times. But if you're speaking specifically to non-residential, so that would be commercial, industrial types of parking standards, we haven't seen the same challenge as maybe other municipalities have, or that we were definitely not to the same extent as we were experiencing with viability of residential parking. And so we did focus on the residential, reducing the residential rates. And I would suggest, if we were wanting to contemplate some changes to the non-residential, it would require further study, and I think in a more comprehensive way.
Okay, thank you. And just supplemental, if I may, Chair Parnell, thank you. The maps that are at the back, the appendices, the transportation master plan, the cycling master plan, we have those maps, but I guess there was a question come forward to me about the secondary transportation plan maps, that providing them may be confusing, because, you know, are they really needed is the question, because that could become confusing and problematic and maybe a liability. Thanks.
Through the chair to Councillor Chica, those are appendices to the bylaw. They were generated as a result of a series of technical memos that were prepared in association with the secondary planning component of this project for the strategic growth areas. And so it's really they're intended to be sort of guiding documents for things that the city has identified through other studies and information that was gathered through the secondary plan component of the project. But they don't have status in the official plan, and we've heard that from other folks through since the preparation of the draft bylaw. And at this point, I think you know, staff is considering removing those from the draft bylaw.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thanks, Ms. Kimball. I just wanted to raise that because it had come forward. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Duguay, please.
Thank you, Chair Parnell. Referring to page 103, table 5.1, motor vehicle parking requirements for residential uses. It references social housing dwelling units, and that's a defined term in our bylaw, but I don't see that we have a parking rate for affordable housing units. So do we need that, or is that being addressed in some other manner? Because I do recall in these chambers, when affordable housing projects come forward, we have different tools for accommodating reduced parking rate. I'm wondering if Mrs. Kimball perhaps has a response. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mrs. Kimball, please.
Through the chair to Councillor Duguay. So there are provisions in the city's official plan with respect to parking and cash in lieu specifically for affordable housing developments. And so there is inherently an exemption from the payment of cash in lieu for affordable projects. So although, you know, it's not reflected in this, there's obviously a requirement for affordable units to have some parking. There are provisions, and it's also incorporated into affordable housing agreements that we enter into, whereby I believe, but I stand to be corrected under the current affordable housing CIP. I believe that the cash in lieu value of the parking that would otherwise be required, it goes back to the project as a municipal contribution. So it's a bit complicated, but suffice it to say that affordable housing requirements are treated, or affordable housing units are treated differently from a parking perspective, and are receive either reduced or eliminated requirement to pay cash in lieu.
So, Madam Chair, what I'm wondering, if that, I'm still believe it would be beneficial to the reader that we reference something for affordable housing, because we may have examples where we don't enter, for example, there's no cash in lieu. And how do we arrive at a parking requirement for affordable housing if they're not paying cash in lieu of parking? There's certain exemptions not applicable. Should table 5.1 consider some description of a rate unless it's otherwise accommodated through a cash in lieu municipal program?
Through the chair to Councillor Duguay, I would suggest that the affordability of the project, so unless it's the affordable units are being managed by the corporation of the city of Peterborough, a municipal services corporation established under the Municipal Act, or a local housing corporation, then the parking rates that would be assigned to that development are simply in keeping with any of the other residential housing types that are identified in that table. And so that's the established sort of rate. And then by virtue of the affordability of those units through other programs like the cash in lieu or the CIP, we would reduce that requirement on site.
Madam Chair, I'll leave it at that. But again, we've heard a priority of the municipality through our community benefits is affordable housing. And I believe when reading the bylaw, when reading this section, it might benefit the reader if there was some language with respect to how affordable parking is calculated for affordable. But I'll leave it at that, because it is a circuitous route to figure out what you have to read through a bunch of documents. I'll leave it at that for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you. That's on the list of requests. Councillor Burke, you're next.
Chair, through you to staff. I guess staff means Miss Kimball. Been doing a lot. Thank you. My question is around my precinct that I represent, and Councillor LaChica. Does it make sense to have a provision, or is it not it might not be possible, but we've had some circumstances whereby developers would like to densify, create more housing, but they would like to use, instead of having parking on their lot, they would like to take advantage of providing parking for their tenants on a municipal lot, providing it through a third party. If it's within, in the one example that the mayor and Councillor LaChica and I have been in contact about, it's literally, there's a municipal lot adjacent to this development. And it makes very good sense for the developer, instead of having to be required to provide a parking lot, that they just take advantage of our municipal lot and provide the spaces for their tenants through that lot. Would it make sense to have a provision for those examples, for that example, in the CPP, in our precinct?
Through the chair to Councillor Bierk, we do have a cash in lieu of parking policy, which was just adopted by council last year. And inherent in that policy are options, and particularly in the strategic growth areas and the central area, for example. We offer that opportunity today for a landowner to rather than provide the required parking on site, to pay a cash in lieu amount. That money that the city collects through cash in lieu is earmarked for the creation and maintenance of public parking or other transportation demand management efforts. So that is how it's working. But in order to determine how many parking spaces they would otherwise need to provide, you would have to refer to the parking requirements.
I understand
in the
that.
bylaw.
I understand that through the chair. What I mean is that you're presenting me with two doors. Door number one is provide the spots. Door number two is to provide cash in lieu of those spots. What I'm talking about is a third option, which is that in certain cases, especially in the downtown core, there are examples where a development happens next to a municipal lot where the developer is able to take the responsibility of providing the number of spaces required for their own tenants by way of having those at a separate site. Not cash in lieu, not a parking lot on their site. A third option where they pay for the X amount, say it's 40 parking spots they need for the build. The option that this developer said to us is he wanted the ability to be able to buy a parking pass for X number of spots to serve his development.
I may speak to that if I can, Madam Chair. So and having some familiarity with the example that you're speaking to, the zoning bylaw today, the CPP bylaw tomorrow requires new development to create off-street parking, to handle the demand that those developments generate. The cash in lieu bylaw offers the opportunity, if you're in a strategic growth area, to pay cash instead of physically building parking, which, in a scenario where land is tight, that's a viable option, and people choose that. If someone chooses to pay cash in lieu of parking, they could certainly come to the city's parking garage and, like anyone else, and, lease spaces from us or rent spaces from us as anyone could. I think the what you're suggesting in terms of an option 3, again, is something we would need to kind of dig into a little bit more, but there's a couple red flags that jump out at me. So since the zoning bylaw or the CPP bylaw inherently requires the creation of new parking, and you are potentially allowing someone to forego the cost of creating new parking and instead just leasing space from a city garage, that might be interpreted as bonusing on the municipal act, as you are now providing sort of a favor, if you will, to that development, an advantage to that development where they are no longer having to provide something they were otherwise required to provide.
I mean, we're only providing, I'll finish up. We're only providing a favor because we don't have a policy surrounding it. And what I'm trying to suggest is that I believe there are opportunities for us to create a very prescribed circumstance whereby certain development can access our underutilized public parking garages and offer their parking spaces to their tenants, especially in the downtown core through those spaces. I'll leave it at that. We can talk offline about this. Thank you.
Okay, we're just going to pause for one moment before we launch into section 6, which is the central area precincts, because we've kind of floated into it anyway. Just by a show of hands, I'm wondering if people are okay with going until 5 o'clock today. Okay, so we would not have quorum, so we have 10 minutes to get through the rest of this. We'll do the best we can, and then if you have any other questions, please send them to planning staff. So please, we're going into section 6. Be very succinct in your questions. Thank you.
I don't think there's too much introduction required. Section 6 through 13 of the bylaw introduces the various precincts. So we could start with section 6, which is the central area precinct.
Okay, thank you. Any questions specifically to section 6, which is pages 124 to 138? Councillor Burke?
Thank you. I'm on page 210 of our agenda. I don't see it's the schedule D1 class 2 max building heights. And I noticed that in the central area here, there's only one small section that allows for 18 stories, and it's a 3-block section. And I'm just wondering if staff can tell me what public consultation led to staff's decision to have this very small 3-block radius be at a different max height than the rest of the central area, the rest of the downtown core.
Mrs. Kimball?
Through the chair to Councillor Bierk, the height provisions have been subject of consultation since, I believe, February of 2024. So there has been quite a bit of consultation, or sorry, February of 2025. There has been quite a bit of consultation with the public about building heights. The industrial conversion area, which is, I think, the area that you're referring to, was identified as being appropriate for higher building heights, recognizing essentially the potential cost for development and introducing an opportunity for development in that area to be viable, because as you're likely aware, most of those lands are require significant remediation from a cleaning the soils perspective. So there is a significant cost associated with that, and so that was some of the impetus for facilitating taller buildings in that area.
Thank you. And then supplemental, if that's the logic, that allowing a maximum compared to the rest of the precinct building height in that area to promote development because of the remediation, then I'm wondering why the General Electric site, which is a huge green square on our map, is limited to 22 meters. Would we not apply the same logic to that site?
Through the chair to Councillor Bierk, we can take that into consideration, but there is a difference. It's in a general employment precinct, the GE lands, I believe, versus a downtown core or industrial conversion precinct. And so it does have different development standards associated with that, but we could certainly consider, a site-specific increase for the GE lands, for example, if that's what council wishes.
Thank you, Councillor Riel.
To the chair, to Ms. Kimball or Mr. Appleby, if I was to submit a motion to you that on Schedule J, or I guess the downtown and certainly East City, that a building couldn't be any higher than 10 stories, what would be the implication of that, seeing that a 17-story building has already been um, gone through council here? How would that impact if I was to make a motion like that with another developer coming and challenging that at the OLT?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. So if you were to propose, let's say a 10-story height maximum for each city, that's what you're suggesting? 100 Street East?
Street.
So what essentially the CPP bylaw then would have an upper limit for height. And if anyone wanted to come in and develop something that's beyond that height, they would need to file an amendment to the bylaw. And council would need to go through the process of either, approving or rejecting that application. And similar to the way zoning bylaws are processed right now in terms of amendments, the applicant would have the ability to appeal council's decision on that amendment to the CPP bylaw if they wanted to build taller. Other specified persons and groups would also have the ability to appeal that as well. It would not affect anything related to the existing 17-story building that has been previously approved, because that was under a different regime. That would, the way this bylaw is structured, that development could still proceed under the permissions it was previously granted.
Thank you, Councillor Hickey. Last question.
Thank you very much. I'll be very quick. Height transition, page 138. And I'm getting these confused all the time. Step back versus angular plane. My impression was, through you to Ms. Kimball, that we eliminated the angular plane requirement. Am I wrong again?
Ms. Kimball?
Through the chair to Councillor Hickey, those provisions were eliminated from the official plan, but not from the zoning bylaw, or like there was no direction with respect to them being eliminated from the CPP. However, angular plane is just one measure of ensuring proper transition between higher and lower density developments. There are provisions in the bylaw that provide some flexibility in that regard.
Okay, I'll send a note, because the angular plane and the development community, and we know all of them, have been complaining consistently about that because of the cost. We talk about affordable, and this makes it very unaffordable. And I was under the mistaken impression, I realized we eliminated it from the OP, but I thought it was coming out of here too. So that's something I will address, and we can address it later on. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a minute and a half left, so I do have to cut off debate. At the request, sorry, Councillor Chica, you'll be able to send your question. We only have a minute left. So at the request of staff, we do have a motion to consider all of your suggestions for review. And the suggested motion is that staff be directed to review the suggested amendments from the April 23rd, 2026 General Committee meeting on the draft community planning permit bylaw and report back to Council in June 2026 on the implementation of those potential amendments. Do I have a mover? Councillor Duguay? We should just take a vote on that. Is everybody okay with that? Well, hopefully we're hoping for it by the end of May, but if we're just keeping a little bit of wiggle room. Okay, so, yeah. I can read it again. That staff be directed to review the suggested amendments from the April 23rd, 2026 General Committee meeting on the draft community planning permit bylaw and report back to Council in June 2026 on the implementation of those potential amendments. Do we have a list now? Oh, well, that's amazing if you already have a list. So can the list be shared? Basically, it's all of your suggestions and recommendations staff are going to review
That was the whole plan. So that's what this is for, is just to put it in writing that that's our direction to staff. Okay, so I'm going to call a vote. And I realize this is rushed. I'm sorry. Okay. Councillor Hickey's a yes. Okay, well, we're waiting for that vote to come up. Everyone is still encouraged, if you have leftover questions, please send them to Director Appleby and Mrs. Kimball for them to consider with this. That motion has carried 9-0, so unanimous. And now I'm calling for adjournment, a motion for adjournment. Councillor Cowley? Oh, sorry. So yes, I do have to go back to Councillor Duguay's original motion about this meeting with this amendment. So we are now voting on the main motion as amended. Yes. Councillor Burks, yes. Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Thanks, Chair Parnell. My colleague will just load that up here momentarily and we'll have it ready to go.
Okay, there it is. That is carried unanimous, and Councillor Crawley has moved that we adjourn. And that is unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Special thanks to our planning staff. Mrs. Kimball, you're spectacular. You are. We are really lucky to have you and your team. Thank you.